Hello, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Trump claims a deal with Iran is close after changing his mind to strike Tehran for a third time this week. Former South Korean president is sentenced to 30 years in jail for sending drones into North Korea. And the World Cup kicks off in Mexico City with live performances, and South Africa loses against Mexico, and South Korea beats the Czech Republic. First this morning, President Donald Trump said he had called off planned strikes, citing progress toward a possible agreement with Iran, but Tehran says no final deal has been reached, leaving uncertainty over the next steps in a crisis that has raised fears for regional security, energy markets, and shipping through the Strait of Hormuz.
US President Donald Trump says he has cancelled planned strikes against Iran, claiming a deal is close, though Tehran says no final agreement has been reached. Trump said on Truth Social that scheduled bombings would not go ahead, but added that a US naval blockade would remain in place until an agreement is finalised. He said the time and place of a possible signing would be announced shortly. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghai said Tehran had not made a final decision and described reports of an agreement as speculation. The announcement came hours after Trump threatened to hit Iran very hard and said the United States could move to take control of Karg Island and other oil infrastructure. Karg Island is a major Iranian oil terminal that handles roughly 90% of the country's crude exports. Iran says its armed forces are on the highest state of alert. Its main military command warned that any future US attack would trigger a stronger response, accusing Washington of speaking about diplomacy while carrying out hostile actions. Despite Trump's claim that the US has ended the war with Iran, Tehran says no final agreement has been reached.
Now let's take a look at the story shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to the Guardian website, where it's also focusing on our top story this morning, and it says oil prices fall after Trump says he is cancelling strikes as it happened. So we know yesterday there were, and throughout the course of this week, there's been a number of strikes and retaliatory strikes on Iran from the US, and also Israel on South Lebanon, and Iran on North Israel, so the northern part of Israel. Well, the US president now has claimed that the initial agreement at ending the war was very close, but he has said this a number of times previously before. And if we keep scrolling down, we'll come to a map of exactly how things are looking now. He said that this was after posting what he had put down, saying that he'd cancelled strikes on his social platform Truth. He said, "We just made a great settlement of the war with Iran." And he told that to reporters in the Oval Office on Thursday. Now, Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson said an agreement was speculative and nothing had been finalized. Trump has made similar claims in the past that the two countries are close to reaching a deal to end the conflict. And hours before the announcement, Trump had declared he would hit Iran very hard. So there were some very hard words up until this point in time, when we had Trump, the US, sending military strikes over to Iran in hitting a number of its bases, and then Tehran responding by hitting Gulf states. Now, just as a reminder, the US and Israel both launched a joint attack on wide-ranging strikes on Iran on the 28th of February. Iran responded by attacking Israel and the US allied states in the Gulf and effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz, which is a key shipping route for the world's oil and liquefied natural gas. And just to add to that in Donald Trump's announcement that an agreement with Iran was imminent and could be signed maybe over the course of the weekend in Europe, is what President Donald Trump said, as well as the Strait of Hormuz would be open as soon as we sign the documents of the Great Settlement, is what he's saying. And he also added that the whole of the Middle East is happy, Trump said. Despite having agreed a ceasefire in April, the US and Iran have exchanged intermittent fire, including 2 rounds of tit-for-tat strikes this week. And at the same time, Trump has repeatedly said that talks of a prospect deal was just around the corner. And as you can see on your screens coming up, there is a map here showing exactly where Iran is, the Strait of Hormuz, Kharg Island, which has been hit by US military a number of times here, which we know, and a few other places. But the Strait of Hormuz is the main point of contention because we know that the US has got its own troops here blockading Iran oil ports as well, which is also having an economic impact on Iran. Now, the title of the Guardian website shows that oil prices have slowly been able to fall down because Trump has decided not to send any missiles over to Iran over the course of the morning, which is a good sign. However, we've seen this previously before, so we don't know whether or not this will actually turn into some form of deal, but we are waiting to see whether or not what Trump's word actually comes into fruition, and maybe the two countries are able to successfully come to an agreement and a halt in war and strikes in between them and hopefully Lebanon as well. Okay, now let's move over to our next story this morning, and that's on Al Jazeera's website. And the headline reads, drone strikes on central Sudanese city kill up to 23. That's from a local NGO report there. What we know is that a drone strike happened on a funeral procession at a cemetery in the Sudanese city of El Obeid and has killed at least 4 people. Now that figure looks like to be a lot higher than some of the other reports that we are getting, and that's by 2 rights groups who have said this. Now, both groups blamed the Parliamentary Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, for the attack, and emergency lawyers said it was part of a series of drone strikes that started on Wednesday evening, where at least 23 people had died. Now, the RSF has not commented on this particular strike, but El Obeid is currently in the hands of the army and is a key battleground in the Sudanese 3-year civil war, which began after the leaders of the army and the RSF fell out over the future direction of the country. Now, the fighting has created the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with more than 11 people forced from their homes and 28 million facing acute hunger. There are no reliable figures for the amount of deaths that has happened, but there is thought to be at least 50,000 that have died in this due to the Sudan civil war. And in addition to the attack on the cemetery this week, emergency lawyers said that drones struck homes in a residential neighborhood, the airport district, and areas surrounding an army base. But we'll provide you with more information. It's just very sad that civilians have also been caught up in this conflict, and we'll continue to keep reporting on this matter as soon as we know get any more information in relation to what's going on in Sudan. Okay, now let's move over to our next headline this morning, and that's on the New York Times, and that reads, SpaceX sets milestone with world's largest IPO, furthering Musk's power. Now, this has been everywhere over the past couple of days because Elon Musk has been talking about making the company go public and having shares where people can actually buy a number of shares to lift the amount of what it's worth, and that actually happens today. So SpaceX has actually been able to raise $75 billion from financial firms ahead of its becoming a publicly traded company on Friday, and what is expected to be the highest value stock listing in history. In a filing with the US Securities and Exchange Commission, the company said it had sold $75 billion in shares priced at $135 each. Now, that share price matches the estimate SpaceX gave last week, leaving the firm's expected initial stock market value to be nearly $1.8 trillion. And at that value, Chief Executive Elon Musk, who is already the richest man in the world, is set to become the world's first trillionaire. Now, once shares start trading, their value could actually rise or fall depending on how many shares are made available for sale and how strong the demand is for those shares as well. And on Friday today, millions of those new shares in the company will start trading on the stock market. And we know that there are now more than 550 million shares available, which SpaceX has announced, and it hopes to sell each of them at $135. So individuals will be able to get a chance to buy shares via investment platforms if they so wish to do so. Okay, well, now we move over to our final headline this morning, which is everywhere, because guess what's kicked off? The World Cup has kicked off, and the BBC, that leads on BBC because it says World Cup kicks off in Mexico with Shakira dancing and protests. We will be discussing this more later on in the program, but just to give you a brief headline, because it's actually happening in our time. We've just had a match finish, which was between the Czech Republic and South Korea, and South Korea took the win over the Czech Republic. And before then, Mexico City did the first kickoff against South Africa team and won 2-0 against them. Now, we know that this all began yesterday afternoon, and we can see some colourful pictures coming through from what we can see here from the BBC. There was colour, there was dancing, there was performances by global music star Shakira and Afrobeat star Burna Boy, with alongside Latin music star Danny Ocean. They also had there the Grammy-winning South African star Tyler performing the country's national anthem. Now, there were thousands of fans who arrived at the legendary Azteca Stadium in Mexico City. But outside the stadium, there were also sporadic violent clashes as radical protesters attempted to disrupt the event and were met by heavy security responses. And as you can see from those pictures there, just more, we've got Shakira in the yellow, waving the symbolic symbol of her country, Colombia, but also as an opening act in the World Cup as well. So that Mexico kicked off their campaign with a 2-0 win over South Africa, and then the next match was with Czech Republic versus South Korea, which unfortunately they lost to, but South Korea won. I believe the score, and I could be wrong, so I'm going to confirm that later on, was a 2-1 to South Korea. Oh, my director just confirmed that. So that was a 2-1 to South Korea, who beat off the Czech Republic. Now, the next games will be on Friday today. Canada and Bosnia and Herzegovina will be in a match at 2300 our time, Baku time. It's actually 3 o'clock in Mexico. And then the next match will be the US versus Paraguay at 5 a.m. on Saturday morning. Now, these timings obviously are going to be vastly different to those that are currently watching it or being there in Mexico, the US and Canada. So it's going to be the very early mornings for those who are in the West and further east as well. So if you do want to stay up, those are some of the times that you might have to get up a bit earlier or go to bed a bit later, depending on what you prefer. But later on, we'll have some more of this information on how the World Cup actually came all together. As you can still see some pictures coming up on your screen, with more dancing and more festivities as the World Cup was kicked off on Thursday and continues on to today. Okay, well, that's your morning press headline wrap up for now. I'm now going to take a quick break. When I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, you're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the global stories this morning. And we head over first to the UK, and its Defence Secretary John Healey has resigned after what he calls our plans for spending on defence falls well short of what's required. This is yet another blow for Keir Starmer's government. Our correspondent John Bevere reports from London.
In a scathing letter of resignation, John Healey said the Prime Minister has been unwilling to commit the resources that the nation needs to defend the country at this time of rising threats. The outgoing Defence Secretary also said that the lack of funding meant he was being forced to make decisions that would reduce the readiness of our forces and increase the risk to personnel on operations and could make the country less safe. The defence spending plans for the UK were expected to be unveiled in the coming days, but there have already been off-the-record comments from senior members of the armed forces that the funding being suggested isn't enough. Despite bold government rhetoric, there are warnings that cuts will need to be made without close to £30 billion of additional funding. It's a difficult balancing act for a government that face a tricky financial environment and a near stagnant UK economy. Defence spending has to be weighed alongside government spending on health, welfare and education, to name just a few. John Healey is the 6th government minister to step down in the past month, as Prime Minister Keir Starmer faces a slow-moving leadership contest. Among those expected to take part, former Health Secretary Wes Streeting and Mayor of Manchester Andy Burnham, who's standing in a by-election next week to try and get back into Parliament and ultimately bid to unseat the Prime Minister. John Beaver for A News in London.
Now, Russia has said on Thursday its forces captured 2 settlements and advanced in the northern Donetsk region. Ukraine said it carried out overnight strikes on military, industrial and logistical targets inside Russia, including oil refineries and drone production facilities. Both sides reported civilian casualties, with 2 people killed and 10 injured in Russia's Bryansk region. Separately, 1 person was killed and at least 4 others injured in drone attacks in Ukraine's Sumy and Mykolaiv regions. Authorities in Northern Ireland are stepping up security after renewed violence in Belfast continues after a victim of a recent stabbing was left with serious injuries circulated online. Let's go to our correspondent with more.
Belfast is bracing for further unrest after violence erupted across parts of the city following Monday's stabbing attack. Police in Northern Ireland say 16 people were arrested during a second night of disorder, with 2 now charged. A 28-year-old man and a 24-year-old woman are due before the courts after clashes that left 12 police officers injured. The violence followed Monday's stabbing attack on Stephen Ogilvie. His family say he remains in a coma, but his condition is improving. Ogilvie lost an eye in the attack. The man accused of attempting to murder him, 30-year-old Hadi Aludid, appeared in court on Wednesday and has been remanded in custody. Police say officers were targeted with bricks, petrol bombs and other missiles as masked rioters clashed with security forces. Extra officers from across the UK are now being deployed to Northern Ireland in an effort to prevent further disorder. Northern Ireland Secretary Hilary Benn strongly condemned the violence, describing those responsible as engaging in what he called racist thuggery. Downing Street has also characterized the scenes as racist. The unrest has had wider consequences for the city. Public transport services have again been disrupted, with Translink suspending glider, metro and Ulster bus services from Belfast from early evening following security concerns. A glider bus was set on fire during the first night of violence. Meanwhile, a nurse travelling to work at Ulster Hospital was reportedly chased and intimidated. Health officials condemned what they described as a racist attack and praised her determination to continue caring for patients. The issue is also expected to feature in political discussions, with the Irish Prime Minister due to raise immigration matters during talks with Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Zainab Farizadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
A major diplomatic rift is widening within Europe over Ukraine peace frameworks. Speaking ahead of international summits, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has rejected small group coalitions within the bloc, arguing they lack the legitimacy to negotiate for all 27 nations. Here's more.
Italy is pushing for a strategic shift in how the European Union manages future diplomatic engagements regarding the conflict in Ukraine. Addressing lawmakers in Rome ahead of major international summits, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni argued that restricted groups of member states lack the collective mandate to represent the entire bloc in high-level negotiations.
In any serious peace scenario between Ukraine and Russia, several conditions depend on Europe, concern Europe, affect Europe, and it is up to Europe to negotiate them. What I mean is that our firmness toward Russia must not turn into diplomatic blindness or self-exclusion.
The diplomatic friction intensified on Thursday as the ambassadors of France, Germany and Great Britain, collectively known as the E3 Alliance, held a high-level meeting at the Russian Foreign Ministry in Moscow. Leaving the ministry building, French Ambassador Nicolas de Rivière confirmed that discussions had taken place.
We just had a good discussion and we will release the statement later today. Thank you.
The Moscow talks follow a weekend meeting in London where E3 leaders met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Diplomatic sources confirm that the 4 parties agreed to use the current line of contact as a baseline for negotiations, alongside legally binding security guarantees and the ongoing immobilization of frozen Russian assets. However, Rome's current push reflects growing concerns among other European capitals over being excluded from these core processes. Concurrently, Russian President Vladimir Putin stated that initial peace proposals outlined by US President Donald Trump could serve as a basis for future agreements, though Moscow maintains its demand for territorial concessions. As European leaders prepare to press these diplomatic frameworks at the upcoming G7 summit, the coordination of a unified Western strategy remains unfinalized.
Now, Slovenia's new government has lifted an entry ban on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his ministers, reversing policies introduced by the previous administration. The government also ended restrictions on imports from Jewish settlements and removed an embargo on military exports and transit involving Israel. Heading over to Israel, clashes have erupted in Jerusalem during protests against the military conscription of ultra-Orthodox Jews. Israeli police say 3 people were arrested as officers moved to disperse demonstrators. Here's more.
Israeli police said 3 ultra-Orthodox Jewish protesters were arrested following demonstrations against the detention of Haredi Jews who oppose military conscription. Police said the suspects were arrested on suspicion of public disorder offences and assaulting officers, and are expected to be questioned. The protests were organised in response to the detention of several Haredi men arrested last week after allegedly attempting to storm the home of Israeli Supreme Court Deputy President Noam Solberg. The demonstrations were also directed against the enlistment of yeshiva students who study religious texts in traditional Jewish institutions. According to police, protests took place at several locations across Jerusalem, including outside the Russian compound detention facility, where some gatherings turned violent. Police said demonstrators blocked roads, disrupted traffic, threw objects at officers, and refused to follow instructions. Officers used stun grenades and mounted units to disperse crowds and reopen roads. The Haredi community has continued to protest military service since an Israeli Supreme Court ruling in June 2024 ordered their conscription and halted funding for religious institutions whose students refuse to serve. Haredim make up around 13% of Israel's population of 10 million. Many oppose military service, arguing that full-time Torah study is their religious duty and that integration into secular society threatens their way of life.
Turning over to the US, and the US and Canada have delayed the opening of a new $4.7 billion bridge linking Detroit with Windsor, Ontario, and after objections from US President Donald Trump. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said the delay came at the request of the Trump administration. Speaking in Toronto, he said taking a few more weeks to settle the matter was worthwhile for a bridge expected to serve both countries for decades. Trump had earlier threatened to block the crossing, citing trade disputes between Washington and Ottawa. A court in Seoul on Friday sentenced former South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol to 30 years in prison for his role in a 2024 military drone incursion over the North Korean capital. Judges say Yoon helped orchestrate the operation as part of an effort that later led to his failed martial law declaration. He was found guilty of aiding the enemy and abuse of power. The sentence follows earlier convictions linked to the martial law attempt, which resulted in his impeachment, removal from office, and the election of President Lee Jae-myung. Yoon denies wrongdoing and is expected to appeal the latest ruling. Climate change is reshaping communities across East Africa, and in Kenya's Rift Valley, the impact is visible along the shores of Lake Naivasha.
Rising water levels at Lake Naivasha in Kenya's Rift Valley are swallowing shorelines, disrupting ecosystems and forcing some communities to abandon their homes. The freshwater lake, known for its biodiversity and tourism value, has expanded steadily over the past several years, following persistent heavy rains linked to climate change. Buildings that once stood along the banks are now surrounded by water, while low-lying areas have been submerged. The rising waters are also affecting wildlife. As the lake pushes further inland, hippos and other animals are moving closer to residential areas, increasing the risk of human-wildlife conflict. Experts say Lake Naivasha is not an isolated case. Other Rift Valley lakes, including Baringo and Nakuru, are also expanding, with consequences for agriculture, fisheries and local communities.
And from our research, we find that whenever we had the increase in the sea surface temperatures in the Indian Ocean and also in the Pacific, in the equatorial Pacific Ocean, now it causes the rainfall in the Eastern Africa region to increase, especially like during when we have the El Nino. But now we would say that in terms of it being exceeding the threshold of the ecosystems.
With water levels continuing to threaten biodiversity, livelihoods and human safety, specialists are calling for stronger climate monitoring and disaster warning systems.
Mexico has kicked off the 2026 World Cup with a 2-0 win over South Africa in the opening match. While the action on the pitch featured more red cards than goals, fans in Mexico City were already celebrating the tournament's first victory. And in a strange turn, some African football fans across the continent decided to support Mexico after non-South African nationals were deported from the country. Our correspondent Tony Waterman sent in this report.
Well, the South Africa fans leaving this game very disappointed, but I can tell you the Mexican fans are absolutely electrified. We are inside the fan zone in Mexico City. This has been transformed into a sea of color, noise, celebration. You have people wearing their team jerseys. They're singing, they're dancing, 55,000 individuals allowed in here. Of course, a lot of the people telling us that they came to the fan zone because they simply can't afford the eye-wateringly high prices of tickets for this World Cup, but saying that they're having just as much fun here on the ground. Of course, a lot of the people here are from Mexico, but we have been talking to people from around the world here to celebrate their teams. This is where everything kicks off. But the games are going to be played across 16 cities in 3 host countries, Mexico, the United States, and Canada. But I don't know, I'd be willing to bet that perhaps the loudest fan zone is going to be right here in Mexico City. Tony Waterman, A News, Mexico City.
Looks very vibrant there to be in Mexico City during the World Cup. Wow. Now we're going to take a quick break. When I return, we'll be taking a closer look at the regional stories, and I'll be joined by a guest to go through of those headlines. So don't go anywhere. Welcome back and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's turn to the region for some of the headlines, and we head over to the Middle Corridor, which is increasingly being viewed as far more than a trade route linking Europe and Asia. Speaking at the Trans-Caspian Forum, Assistant to the President of Azerbaijan, Hikmat Hajiev, said the corridor is evolving into a strategic geo-economic system, with projects such as the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars Railway and the proposed Zangezur corridor playing a key role. Against a backdrop of instability in the Middle East, renewed momentum in the Azerbaijan-Armenia peace process and growing regional economic ties, the stakes are higher than ever. So what could this mean for the regional stability, trade and the geopolitical future of the South Caucasus? Joining me now is Fuad Kamrali, political analyst in Baku.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming onto the program. Well, let's start with what Hikmat Hajiev has said. He explicitly frames the Middle Corridor as shifting from a transport route to a geo-economic system. What does that institutional and governance transition actually require in practice?
Yeah, I think what the President of the system, Hikmat Hajiev, said is really on point, and there are some things that need to be considered for these transitions to take place. So, for example, it first of all has to evolve from a passive transit route into an active driver of regional industrial value. So in practice, this means that countries must have some sort of a unified, digitized customs and transit systems in place to limit the bureaucratic stops and delays at the borders. So it looks at demands a deliberate push towards local economic integration, which we see that's already been taking place, at least in the South Caucasus. There's been more economic integration and trade between the countries compared to the past. But it has to evolve into the digital and energy networks as well, such as connecting the Caspian and Black Sea green energy corridors.
And how does the prospect of a peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia change the strategic significance of the Zangezur corridor?
A formal peace agreement, it will fundamentally shift the Zangezur corridor rhetoric from a security debate into a commercial reality. So it won't be a topic of whether there is peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but to what extent the economic relations can prosper. So while routes like the Tbilisi-Kars rail line, it can handle heavy loads, the Zangezur corridor, it provides a direct and highly efficient southern link connecting mainland Azerbaijan to Turkey, and then to Nakhchivan to Turkey, and then to Europe as well. So this is a really good option for international shippers and insurance. As a peace-backed corridor, it dramatically lowers the geopolitical risks and elevates long-term investor confidence.
And is the corridor building the institutional depth and shipper confidence to retain traffic once southern routes stabilise, or is it essentially capitalising on a window that may close soon, just because of what's happening over in the Middle East at the moment?
Well, it's unarguable that there is a window that currently exists, but it doesn't mean that there cannot be any institutional depth. We see that the middle corridor is actively converting this geopolitical window into permanent institutional depth, because we see a massive shift in scale, volumes that are rapidly increasing to meet targets that are being set for tens of millions by 2027. So this is a surge in container traffic, and we also see that there's been a unified logistics company formed between Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Kazakhstan. These are all institutional changes that are taking place that really does solidify this kind of shift in the shipper confidence to keep the traffic once, hopefully, the southern routes do stabilize as well. But the middle corridor is securing its place as an indispensable Eurasian route.
Yes, and it's something that a lot of countries, especially the EU, is looking at and finding viable routes outside of contested shipping routes that are unfortunately wrapped up in war or conflict. Now, just staying on it, but moving to a different part, what does the recent growth then in energy trade and oil shipments between Azerbaijan and Armenia tell us about the changing relationship between the two countries? Because we know that the oil shipments have increased quite lately, and it just shows that the relationship between the two is definitely prospering in one way or the other.
As you already mentioned, there's been a lot of oil shipments between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So over 12,000 tons of diesel and thousands of tons of gasoline have been directly sent to Armenia. It's a historic turning point, I think, specifically for the region and the two countries as well, because this is something that hasn't happened since the independence, basically. So it shows that both countries understand that economic pragmatism is the way to go, and it's really overtaking the geopolitical risks and roadblocks that have been taking place in the past few years. We saw that with the elections in Armenia as well, that people are voting for peace and for economic development as well. So the direct trade, alongside like expanding of transit routes, it proves that both countries recognize that peace really has to be like anchored in tangible mutual economic benefit. And there is an increasingly evolving economic interdependency that in the future would make it really costly to cut off ties again.
And who do you think stands to gain the most and who could potentially lose influence if the middle corridor reaches its full potential?
When we look at the beneficiaries, I think the landlocked countries in South Caucasus and Central Asia will benefit a lot from this, because they will now have direct access to European markets through Azerbaijan, Nakhchivan, Turkey, new routes, simpler routes, and just diversification in the process as well. So for decades, they were locked and they had limited trade routes. But on the other hand, we look at some of the losers per se. The traditional northern route monopolies are being overridden. So, for example, Moscow has capacity to use transit infrastructure as a political tool to put economic pressure on Eurasian countries. We see that it's being fundamentally diminished. So, as a loser in this side, we see that Russia can really take a really big hit.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Russia has definitely taken another big hit. If we rewind to the beginning of this week with the Armenia elections and Nikol Pashinyan securing his victory for a second term, what does that now mean for the relationship with Azerbaijan, especially over the Middle Corridor and where things can progress from that? Also, if we include the fact that he doesn't actually have a full number of constitutional governance or change, and will that provide a challenge later on down the road when things within the constitution in Armenia needs to change in order to benefit its relationship with Azerbaijan?
Well, when we look at the elections, I think there was some division in terms of a lot of the votes being given to like minority parties, which did not make it into parliament. So it shows a lot of people who are actually indecisive as well. So there is a division in the public of simply people that want peace in the region and people that have revanchist ideas. When we look at it through the lens of Russia, they did take a big hit because they did not, Moscow did not want Pashinyan to win. And even though Pashinyan didn't have an absolute majority, some of the more pro-Russian parties are still in parliament. But we see that as soon as Pashinyan won, his rhetoric is really vehemently towards peace. So there's talks about opening up borders with Turkey soon. That also he intends, we see that he intends to make constitutional changes. Whether this is going to be possible or not, how this is going to take place, who he's going to form a coalition with is still something that we have to wait and see. But we see that the Armenian public, they voted for peace. And hopefully the rest of the public that have for some reason have these revanchist ideas will understand that once they see the economic benefits that are taking place and they understand that actually siding with someone that makes veiled threats like increasing gas prices is not really such a good idea.
Yes, it's something that we're definitely watching quite closely. And what is this, the whole route, the Middle Corridor, Zangezur, as well as what I mentioned at the very top of it in relation to what Hikmat Hajiev mentioned in relation to it being a strategic geo-economic system. What does that mean for the South Caucasus in general when we include Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, even stretching it out to other possible actors like Turkey, as well as Central Asian nations as well? What is the main impact that this will have on the South Caucasus?
When we look at the South Caucasus and the neighboring countries as well, the Middle Corridor, it can really provide a new lifeline to the countries. Right? Azerbaijan has always been developing at oil reserves, gas reserves, but then landlocked countries, other countries like Georgia, for example, that do not have significant natural resources, can really benefit from this. Because with the new energy and transit routes, a lot of investment also comes in. So that will drive economic development as well. So the countries, all countries, including Azerbaijan, as well as Central Asian countries, will benefit from this kind of development because the region will act as a strategic and stable partner for energy and transit and trade for Europe.
I see. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Kamri, for coming on and explaining that so well thought out for us. Thank you so much. We will definitely be keeping a closer look as to how this continues to be a strategic partner, especially for Azerbaijan and Armenia going forward.
Thank you.
Now, Azerbaijan has sent another shipment of fuel to neighbouring Armenia as cross-border energy exports between the two countries continue. Nearly 1,000 tonnes of diesel fuel departed from the Belazhiri railway station. The shipment, carried by 17 rail wagons, is heading towards Armenia via Georgia. Officials say Azerbaijan has so far exported more than 12,000 tonnes of diesel fuel, along with 979 tonnes of A192 petrol to Armenia. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says Ottawa is working to deepen ties with Turkey, describing the country as a key NATO ally and a major regional power. Speaking at a news conference in Toronto, Carney said Turkey holds strategic importance across a wide region, stretching from the Balkans to the Middle East and the Caucasus. He said Canada is still in the early stages of expanding the relationship, but both sides are assessing ways to strengthen cooperation. Mark Carney also confirmed he will travel to Turkey for next month's NATO summit and said he is likely to visit the country again later this year. Afghanistan has summoned Pakistan's charge d'affaires to protest alleged airstrikes, while the United Nations is calling for restraint and the protection of civilians. Our A News correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details.
Afghanistan's foreign ministry has summoned Pakistan's ambassador in Kabul to protest Pakistani airstrikes and shelling in eastern Afghanistan. The ministry says Pakistani forces struck parts of Khost, Paktika and Kunar provinces overnight, killing 13 civilians, including 11 children, and injuring 14 others. Afghan authorities strongly condemned the strikes, calling them a violation of Afghanistan's sovereignty, international norms and international law. The ministry said defending Afghanistan's territory and protecting its people are both religious and national responsibilities. It also questioned how the killing of women and children in one country could be considered a way to ensure security in another. The latest incident comes amid months of strained relations between the two neighbors, marked by cross-border clashes, airstrikes and repeated border closures that have disrupted trade and slowed humanitarian aid. Meanwhile, UNAMA has called for urgent de-escalation, urging all sides to protect civilians, respect international humanitarian law, reopen border crossings for aid deliveries, and resolve disputes through dialogue. For now, tensions remain high, with Kabul warning it has the right to defend its territory, while Islamabad says it is targeting groups responsible for attacks inside Pakistan. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Now, the latest strikes have flared tensions once more between Pakistan and Afghanistan, with border crossings shut and movement largely suspended following a fresh escalation in hostilities. Our correspondent Hira Mustafa reports from Islamabad.
Pakistani officials say operations will continue until militants operating from Afghan territory are eliminated. They accuse Kabul of providing safe haven to fighters behind a recent surge in cross-border attacks in Pakistan's northwestern region. Security officials say that Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan has intensified its attacks in recent weeks, mainly targeting security checkpoints and police infrastructure along the border. The violence has disrupted daily life in several districts, according to the locals, while Pakistan has also reported a broader rise in terrorism-related fatalities in recent months. In response, Islamabad says it carried out intelligence-based precision strikes inside Afghanistan, targeting what it calls militant hideouts and killing 26 militants. Officials say Pakistan has repeatedly urged Kabul to take action against these groups, warning it reserves the right to self-defense if attacks continue. Afghanistan has strongly condemned the strikes, calling them a violation of its sovereignty and accusing Pakistan of targeting civilians, allegations Islamabad denies. Amid the escalating tensions, Pakistan is also continuing the repatriation of Afghan refugees. According to UNHCR data, more than 146,000 Afghans returned from Pakistan in May alone. Analysts warn that if tensions persist, civilians on both sides of the border are likely to bear the consequences, further deepening instability in an already fragile region. Hira Mustafa for A News, Islamabad.
Turning to Kazakhstan, and the US and Kazakhstan are looking to deepen cooperation in critical minerals as global competition for rare earths metals intensifies. The issue was in focus in Astana, where officials discussed joint projects in mining, processing and high-tech production. Our correspondent from Kazakhstan reports.
The United States is showing growing interest in Kazakhstan's rare earth metals. In Astana, Central Asian countries and the US held talks on critical minerals, resources increasingly seen as essential for advanced technology, clean energy and defense industries. The discussions took place during the C5+1 critical minerals dialogue attended by officials from Central Asia and the United States. The meeting was co-chaired by Kazakhstan's Minister of Industry and Construction, Yersin Nagaspayev, and U.S. Special Envoy for South and Central Asia, Sergio Gore. Kazakhstan says it wants to move beyond simply exporting raw materials. According to the Ministry of Industry and Construction, the country has more than 9,500 mineral deposits, including over 100 containing rare and rare earth metals. More than $820 million has been invested in geological exploration over the past 7 years. Kazakhstan says it wants cooperation with the United States to go beyond raw material extraction. Astana is proposing a full production cycle from developing mineral deposits to processing and high-tech manufacturing. The plan includes joint projects in critical minerals, the creation of industrial clusters, as well as research and engineering centers. Training for technical and engineering specialists is also expected to be part of the cooperation. The talks extended beyond economics. During a meeting with Sergio Gore, President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev reaffirmed Kazakhstan's interest in closer strategic ties with the United States. Washington, in turn, pointed to growing engagement with Central Asia, saying agreements and deals valued at more than $20 billion had been reached across the region over the past year. Farisa Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Turning to Georgia, and its Prime Minister says the country needs more funding for railway development after the World Bank confirmed a $372 million package for transport infrastructure earlier this month, calling it a major boost for Georgia's role on the Middle Corridor. Our A News correspondent Nini Nikolashvili has more from Tbilisi.
Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze says Georgia must secure further financing for its railway network, calling it a top priority as the country pushes to expand its role on the Middle Corridor trade route between Asia and Europe. His remarks follow the World Bank's confirmation that it will provide $372 million to Georgia under the TC Gate project, part of a wider $750 million package also backed by the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the Asian Development Bank. Kobakhidze said that the government and the Ministry of Finance are working closely with international financial institutions to fund a 10-year railway development plan, and that efforts will continue across every sector to strengthen the country's transit capacity. He pointed to the rapid growth of the Middle Corridor as proof of its strategic value, noting that cargo traffic along the route has increased sevenfold since 2020. He said this surge demonstrates why international institutions are paying closer attention to the corridor's potential and to Georgia's role within it. The TC Gate project is set to modernize Georgia's railway fleet with new energy-efficient locomotives, upgrade key road sections in the Kakheti region, and improve connectivity for around 900,000 people. Officials say the investment will lower transport costs, support job creation, and strengthen Georgia's position as a link between European and Asian markets. Prime Minister Kobakhidze said that the government will keep mobilizing resources to support the country's long-term infrastructure goals. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
It's time to head for a quick break, but when I return, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Don't go anywhere. Hello, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and if you're just joining me, I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Trump claims a deal with Iran is close after changing his mind to strike Tehran for a third time this week. Former South Korean president is sentenced to 30 years in jail for sending drones into North Korea. And the World Cup kicks off in Mexico City to live performances. South Africa loses against Mexico and South Korea beats the Czech Republic. Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we head first over to CBS website, where a Tracy warehouse destroyed in fire as city declares local emergency. Now we do have some video of what that actually looked like, because there was aerial footage showing massive plumes of thick black smoke rising from a warehouse fire in Tracy, California on Thursday. As you can see, they're just coming up onto the screen now. So as you can see there, the fire is blazing through. Now this happened on Thursday after the blaze broke out at a cleaning and maintenance facility. The US Police Department said emergency crews responded to the site at approximately 1 o'clock local time in the afternoon, which is 12 a.m. Baku time, and they had to shut down nearby roads to assist with evacuations and clear the way for firefighters. Now, according to police, the fire was still ongoing 3 hours later. And you can just imagine just all of that catching fire and it travelling so vastly across that warehouse. Now, city officials have warned the public through social media posts of poor air quality and advised residents to avoid the area. There we are. Thankfully, there's been no casualties or fatalities reported there, but that's just some of the aerial footage that you can see. Now let's turn over to our next story this morning, and that's on the BBC website in relation to the World Cup, because World Cup kicks off in Mexico with Shakira dancing and protests. We know that this took place Thursday afternoon their time, late evening our time. So we're picking it up this morning. Now the 2026 World Cup has begun in Mexico with opening ceremony filled with lots of coloured dancing and performances. Now Shakira, the global music star, gave a surprising performance along with Afrobeat star Burna Boy and Latin music star Danny Ocean. They were also joined by the Grammy-winning South African star Tyler, who performed the South Africans' nation's anthem as well. If we keep scrolling down, you'll see more pictures. Now there were thousands of fans who arrived at the legendary Azteca Stadium in Mexico City, but just adding onto this jubilant time, there were also outside of the stadium, there were violent clashes as radical protesters attempted to disrupt the event and were met by heavy security response as well. Now Mexico City kicked off their campaign first by winning a 2-0 win over South Africa, and then Czech Republic played South Korea, and who also they were able to win. So South Korea won a 2-1 over Czech Republic. So they've also been able to celebrate jubilantly. Now the next match that you're going to see on Friday is between Canada and Bosnia and Herzegovina. That's going to be at 11 o'clock Baku time, so quite late in the evening, and that's followed up by the United States and versus Paraguay at 5 a.m. on Saturday. Baku time. So these are just the current games that we have upcoming, and later on in the program I'll be joined by a sports journalist to kind of go into depth about the World Cup this year, what we can expect, the runners and riders, who do you think will make it into the finals, and how things have gone on so far. We know that the tournament is over, going to be taking place in 3 different countries. That's Canada, America and Mexico, which it started off yesterday. So we'll bring you some more information on that. Now let's move over to our next headline this morning, and that's on the US and Iran deal. So on the Guardian website, it's now said oil prices have fallen after Trump says he is cancelling strikes as it happened. Now the US President Donald Trump has claimed an initial agreement at ending the war with Iran is very close. He said this after posting this on social media, after he said that he cancelled strikes on the country, saying that we just made a great settlement of the war with Iran, is what he told reporters in the Oval Office on Thursday. Now Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson said an agreement actually was speculative and nothing had been finalized, but we will provide you with more information in relation to this, because hours before the announcement, Trump had declared he would hit Iran very hard. And we know that throughout this course of the week, there's been tit-for-tat strikes between the two nations, with the US saying that they were doing this in self-defense after a helicopter was downed by Iran, and that's according to US military officials. Iran then retaliated by sending missiles to a number of Gulf US based countries there as well. So we are following this story very closely. Now let's go over to our report that has more information in relation to our top story this morning.
US President Donald Trump says he has cancelled planned strikes against Iran, claiming a deal is close, though Tehran says no final agreement has been reached. Trump said on Truth Social that scheduled bombings would not go ahead, but added that a US naval blockade would remain in place until an agreement is finalised. He said the time and place of a possible signing would be announced shortly. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghai said Tehran had not made a final decision and described reports of an agreement as speculation. The announcement came hours after Trump threatened to hit Iran very hard and said the United States could move to take control of Karg Island and other oil infrastructure. Karg Island is a major Iranian oil terminal that handles roughly 90% of the country's crude exports. Iran says its armed forces are on the highest state of alert. Its main military command warned that any future US attack would trigger a stronger response, accusing Washington of speaking about diplomacy while carrying out hostile actions. Despite Trump's claim that the US has ended the war with Iran, Tehran says no final agreement has been reached.
We head over to the UK now, and authorities in Northern Ireland are stepping up security after renewed violence in Belfast continues after a victim of a recent stabbing was left with serious injuries was circulating online. Let's go to our correspondent on this.
Belfast is bracing for further unrest after violence erupted across parts of the city following Monday's stabbing attack. Police in Northern Ireland say 16 people were arrested during a second night of disorder, with 2 now charged. A 28-year-old man and a 24-year-old woman are due before the courts after clashes that left 12 police officers injured. The violence followed Monday's stabbing attack on Stephen Ogilvie. His family say he remains in a coma, but his condition is improving. Ogilvie lost an eye in the attack. The man accused of attempting to murder him, 30-year-old Hadi Aludid, appeared in court on Wednesday and has been remanded in custody. Police say officers were targeted with bricks, petrol bombs and other missiles as masked rioters clashed with security forces. Extra officers from across the UK are now being deployed to Northern Ireland in an effort to prevent further disorder. Northern Ireland Secretary Hilary Benn strongly condemned the violence, describing those responsible as engaging in what he called racist thuggery. Downing Street has also characterized the scenes as racist. The unrest has had wider consequences for the city. Public transport services have again been disrupted, with Translink suspending glider, metro and Ulster bus services from Belfast from early evening following security concerns. A glider bus was set on fire during the first night of violence. Meanwhile, a nurse travelling to work at Ulster Hospital was reportedly chased and intimidated. Health officials condemned what they described as a racist attack and praised her determination to continue caring for patients. The issue is also expected to feature in political discussions, with the Irish Prime Minister due to raise immigration matters during talks with Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Zainab Farizadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
The Slovenian's new government has lifted an entry ban on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his ministers, reversing policies introduced by the previous administration. The government also ended restrictions on imports from Jewish settlements and removed an embargo on military exports and transit involving Israel. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says NATO allies should rethink how they measure defence spending as modern-day warfare is reshaped by drones, satellites and data. Addressing Parliament, Meloni said that Italy will raise its defence and security spending to around 2.8% of GDP. But she warned against focusing only on headline spending targets, saying the war in Ukraine has shown that military strength can no longer be measured simply by traditional weapons or overall budgets. Thousands of people have marched through Albania's capital on Thursday. They're angry over a planned luxury resort backed by President Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and are calling for the resignation of Prime Minister Edi Rama. Protesters say the €5 billion resort project lacks transparency and threatens a protected coastal wetland near the village of Zrvnik. The development has become a focal point for wider criticism of the government over corruption and public services. Demonstrations began near the proposed development site in May and have since grown. More cases of the Ebola virus have been reported by health officials in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They're warning that the country's latest outbreak shows no sign of slowing down. Here's our report.
Ebola is still spreading in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The number of confirmed cases has risen to more than 670, including 136 deaths, according to health authorities. The latest figures, released on Thursday, include 41 new cases and 9 additional deaths reported the previous day. The outbreak is mostly in the eastern provinces of Ituri, North Kivu and South Kivu, and is caused by the Bundibugyo strain of the virus. Officials say the disease has now affected 29 health zones, with new areas in North Kivu and Ituri reporting infections. Health authorities warn that cases have been increasing by the week. They say there is a risk the outbreak could spread rapidly to new locations if control measures are not strengthened. More than 5,700 people who may have been exposed to the virus are currently being monitored. However, officials say contact tracing remains below target levels, making it harder to break chains of transmission. The outbreak was officially declared on May 15th. It's the country's 17th Ebola outbreak since the virus was first identified there in 1976. Authorities are particularly concerned because the affected region is home to a large number of displaced people, with a frequent cross-border movement with neighbouring countries.
Now we head over to North America, and the United States and Canada have delayed the opening of a new $4.7 billion bridge linking Detroit with Windsor, Ontario, after objections from US President Donald Trump. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said the delay came at the request of the Trump administration. Speaking in Toronto, he said taking a few more weeks to settle the matter was worthwhile for a bridge expected to serve both countries for decades. Trump had earlier threatened to block the crossing, citing trade disputes between Washington and Ottawa. Turning to Turkey, and the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says Ottawa is working to deepen ties with Turkey, describing the country as a key NATO ally and a major regional power. Speaking at a news conference in Toronto, Carney said Turkey holds strategic importance across a wide region, stretching from the Balkans to the Middle East and the Caucasus. He said Canada is still in the early stages of expanding the relationship, but both sides are assessing ways to strengthen cooperation. He also went on to confirm he will travel to the country for next month's NATO summit and said he is likely to visit the country again later in the year. We're now going to take a very short break, but when I return, I'll be joined by a guest to go through what everyone is talking about, the World Cup. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani. Now let's head over to what's going on over in Mexico, because it has kicked off the 2026 World Cup with a 2-0 win over South Africa in the opening match. While the action on the pitch featured more red cards than goals, fans in Mexico City were already celebrating the tournament's first victory, and in a strange turn, some African football fans across the continent also decided to support Mexico after non-South African nationals were deported from the country. Our correspondent Tony Waterman sent in this report.
Well, the South Africa fans leaving this game very disappointed, but I can tell you the Mexican fans are absolutely electrified. We are inside the fan zone in Mexico City. This has been transformed into a sea of color, noise, celebration. You have people wearing their team jerseys. They're singing, they're dancing, 55,000 individuals allowed in here. Of course, a lot of the people telling us that they came to the fan zone because they simply can't afford the eye-wateringly high prices of tickets for this World Cup, but saying that they're having just as much fun here on the ground. Of course, a lot of the people here are from Mexico, but we have been talking to people from around the world here to celebrate their teams. This is where everything kicks off. But the games are going to be played across 16 cities in 3 host countries, Mexico, the United States, and Canada. But I don't know, I'd be willing to bet that perhaps the loudest fan zone is going to be right here in Mexico City. Tony Waterman, A News, Mexico City.
Looks very vibrant there. Now we stay on this topic and now what's been going on in the World Cup, because it was kicked off on Thursday evening and the first match between the host and South Africa. Now it beat South Africa 2-0 and then South Korea came from behind to defeat Czech Republic as a 2-1. And I'm now joined by Sadig Karimov, a sports journalist in Baku, to go over the first day of the World Cup. Hello, good morning. How are you today?
Hello, good morning. I'm fine, and you?
Good, thank you. Well, you would have heard from our report that it's definitely gone to a great start, especially in Mexico City's favor. But I just want to ask you a question in relation to that. Because of what we've just seen, who are the teams that you think we should be looking out for? Are there going to be any surprises? Which countries do you think will make it to the finals? And do you think there's a chance of, Cape Verde, for example, the first team that's ever come to the World Cup, doing something proud for their country as well?
Maybe France is very absolutely fantastic team, and not surprised in the World Cup, because France team and France footballers are very absolutely fantastic, and my favorite team for France Football Club.
I see. So France is one of the best ones that you think. They've got a very good reputation of always making it to the finals in all World Cups. Do you think they could actually take the cup as well? Do you think that they could take the win? Do you think that France can make the win this World Cup?
Yes. I think France has a big chance because France football players is very absolutely fantastic, and maybe France will be champion.
Okay, well, now let's just talk about the fact that this World Cup, it's the first time that it's being hosted by 3 countries. That's Canada, Mexico, and the US. What toll do you think that's likely to have on the players, especially in extreme weather with the heat there, as well as the scheduling and the increased travel? What do you think that will take on the players?
In fact, we can look at the World Cup in Qatar. The tournament was held in November because the heat have caused problems. Air conditioning was turned on the stadiums. There are no such measures now, but this tournament weather breaks will be regular. For example, FIFA World Cup started yesterday, and we watched the water breaks in the Mexico against South Africa, and weather breaks the most important thing in this tournament.
Yes, exactly, to keep the players nice and cool, and we'll definitely see how things go. Do you think that this world's biggest sporting event could be clear and remain politically neutral? We know that politics always seems to try and attach itself to football, but do you think that the World Cup can remain neutral and just focus on the sport and its players?
The tournament is still a legacy, whatever it's held in Africa, America, Europe, Asia. It doesn't matter. And I don't believe Donald Trump will say this about the legacy. The logistic issues should be normal regardless of where it's held. And they could be record revenues because the ticket prices are extremely high this time, and this problem for fans. And if you are rich, it's not a problem for you.
Yes, so it's definitely isolated those fans who are unable to reach those high markers of those tickets that are in the hundreds and sometimes even the thousands per ticket for each game. Do you think Trump has definitely said that it's going to be the biggest and best World Cup that's ever happened? Do you agree with that statement? And what does that mean? Do you think, how is a successful tournament actually, described just by the number of people or how things are done logistically? What would your take on that be?
We are football fans, and we, as football fans, have been waiting for 4 years, and I think we'll be able to answer these questions after the final match, maybe.
Yeah, it looks like we'd have to wait until the very end to see how that all comes together. And let's just focus in on the fans. There's loads of fans, as you mentioned, all across the globe, really wanting to be a part of this. Why is football quite the big unifier when it comes to football? Why is it so, iconic to bring people together?
I think football will always maintain its leadership, no matter how wide the schedules, no matter how many games, no matter how much weather and climate change. Football will always be football, maybe. That's all, maybe.
Yeah, well, we know that, especially from this region, Iran is heading over there, Uzbekistan is in as well, and Turkey. Do any of these countries, anyone from, Azerbaijan, are we rooting for any of these countries? Who do you think could possibly make it further in the tournament this year?
I don't think anything. For this topic.
I see. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Karamov, for your thoughts there. And we'll definitely be paying closer attention as to where this World Cup, what happens this time round.
Thank you.
Now, with the World Cup underway, referees are among the most influential figures on the pitch. Sometimes a single whistle can change the fate of an entire game. One of the most famous examples of this happened back in 1966, and one European country has been hoping for a repeat victory ever since. Let's take a look at this.
It's a goal. One man, one nod, one moment that changed football. In the 1966 World Cup final at Wembley, the England national team was facing West Germany. Time 2-2. Jeff Hurst's shot hit the crossbar and bounced near the line. Referee Gottfried Dienst was unsure, but Tofik Baramov had tracked it carefully. He signalled goal, a decision that helped England win 4-2 and made him the only linesman awarded the Golden Whistle by Queen Elizabeth II. More than half a century later, the decision remains one of the most discussed moments in World Cup history. For Baramov, it became the defining moment of a remarkable career. Born on January 29, 1925, in Shusha, Azerbaijan, Baramov began as a promising footballer, but a leg injury ended his playing career at 25. Undeterred, he turned to refereeing, quickly earning a reputation for fairness, calm authority, and precise judgment. By 1965, he became an international referee and was named to the USSR Top 10 Referees list for 13 consecutive years. His career spanned decades. The 1966 and 1970 World Cups, Euro 1968 and 1972, the 1972 UEFA Cup final first leg, and intercontinental matches. In 15 years of international officiating, he never issued a red card. Baramov's fame extended beyond the pitch. In 1992, British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, a football fan, personally requested to meet him in Baku. English media, including The Sun, recognized him in its top 20 most astonishing World Cup moments, celebrating his role in one of football's most iconic decisions. His life was commemorated in a documentary film, and English author Arthur Hopcroft dedicated his book, The Football Man, to him. Today, Baramov is the only referee in the world to have a stadium in his honor. The Baku Olympic Stadium bears his name. Modern goal line technology now removes ambiguity, but in 1966, it was one man's judgment that changed football forever. He died on March 26, 1993, in Baku. His son Bahram reflects, "People like Tofik Bahramov are only born once in 100 years."
A key moment there and a celebratory one as well, because we're going to see how the World Cup sports teams do this time round and whether or not England can make it again to the finals. I am a bit biased, but we'll see what happens. But that's been your news roundup for this morning. Make sure you tune in to A News throughout the course of the day, as we will have more updates on key stories. I'll be back on your screens next week, bringing you more key information on the stories around the world and in the region. Make sure you stay tuned to A News. Take care.